Right now, somewhere on the wall of your house, water is winning a fight you didn't even know was happening. It's not dramatic, there's no flood, no burst pipe, no obvious leak. It's slower than that, and quieter than that. It's moisture moving through the surface of your walls, a little bit every day, carried by humidity in the air, by rain hitting the exterior, by groundwater wicking up from the foundation. And every can of sealant, every tub of waterproofing compound, every contractor quote you've ever gotten to deal with this problem has been selling you the same basic promise. We will create a barrier, and that barrier will keep the water out. Here's what they don't tell you. That barrier doesn't just keep water out, it keeps moisture in. It traps whatever humidity is already inside your wall, sealing it in a plastic or synthetic shell that has no way to escape. And over time, that trapped moisture causes exactly the kind of damage the sealant was supposed to prevent: mold, rot, crumbling plaster, and a sealant that starts failing within a handful of years, right on schedule for you to buy another can. There is a different way to do this. It is not new, it is not experimental. It is in fact older than the chemical waterproofing industry by centuries, possibly by thousands of years. It uses two ingredients that you almost certainly have some familiarity with already, and it costs a small fraction of what you're currently spending. And the reason you've probably never heard of it has very little to do with whether it works and everything to do with who profits when you don't know about it. The problem with sealing your walls. To understand why this old technique works so well, you first need to understand what's actually happening when water interacts with a wall, and why the modern approach to waterproofing creates a problem it claims to solve. Walls, regardless of what they're made from, brick, stone, adobe, cob, plaster, concrete block, are porous. At a microscopic level, every one of these materials is full of tiny channels and pores. This isn't a flaw, it's actually essential to how these materials have functioned for as long as humans have been building with them. Those pores allow the wall to breathe. Moisture that enters the wall, whether from rain on the outside or humidity from cooking, showering, and breathing on the inside, can move through those pores and evaporate back out, on whichever side conditions allow it to dry fastest. This is a self-regulating system. Walls absorb a little moisture and they release it again. As long as that cycle of absorption and evaporation can continue, the wall stays structurally healthy. The materials don't degrade, mold doesn't have the conditions it needs to take hold, and the building stays dry on the inside, even though the wall itself is, at any given moment, holding some amount of moisture within its pores. Now, here's what happens when you apply a modern synthetic waterproofing product, the kind that comes in a plastic tub from a hardware store, often based on acrylic, vinyl, or other polymer compounds. These products work by forming a continuous film across the surface of the wall. That film is, by design, largely impermeable. Water can't get through it from the outside. That part works exactly as advertised. But that film is also impermeable from the inside. Any moisture that's already in the wall, or that gets into the wall through a crack, a gap around a window, or capillary action from the ground, now has nowhere to go. It can't evaporate through the sealed surface anymore, so it does what trapped moisture always does. It finds somewhere else to go, often migrating sideways or downward within the wall structure until it reaches an unsealed area, where it concentrates and causes much more severe damage than the original problem ever would have. And the synthetic sealant itself, sitting on the surface as a separate layer rather than being absorbed into the material, is subject to its own problems. UV exposure breaks down the polymers over time. Temperature changes cause the wall material underneath to expand and contract at a different rate than the rigid film on top, leading to cracking and peeling. Within 5 to 10 years, in many cases, that expensive waterproofing product is failing. And often it's trapped enough moisture underneath that the wall is now in worse condition than before you protected it. This is, from a business perspective, close to perfect. The product creates a problem that requires the product to fix on a recurring basis, indefinitely. What people did before there was a waterproofing aisle. Long before there was a hardware store with a wall of competing waterproofing brands, people still needed to protect their homes from water, and the solutions they developed through generations of trial and error across completely different climates and cultures share a common logic that modern synthetic sealants completely abandon. In traditional adobe construction, found across the Americas, the Middle East, and parts of Africa and Asia, builders treated their earthen walls with natural oils. These weren't industrial products. They were the same oils that were used in cooking and in oil lamps, applied to the exterior surfaces of walls, sometimes mixed with other natural materials, depending on what was locally available. In stone and cob construction throughout Europe, particularly in regions with significant rainfall, beeswax was used as a finishing treatment for exposed masonry and plaster surfaces. Beekeeping was widespread. Beeswax was a normal household material used for candles, for preserving food, for treating wood and leather, and applying it to exterior walls was simply one more practical use for a material that was already on hand. Neither of these treatments created the kind of thick, continuous plastic-like film that modern sealants produce. And that difference is not a limitation, it's the entire point. When oil is applied to a porous wall surface, it doesn't sit on top like a coating, it soaks in. It penetrates into those microscopic pores we talked about earlier, coating the inside surfaces of the material itself, rather than forming a separate layer over it. Once that oil has penetrated and, depending on the oil, partially cured or oxidized within the material, it changes the wall's relationship with water at a fundamental level. Water that hits the surface beads up and runs off because oil and water don't mix. This is basic chemistry that hasn't changed since before recorded history. But the pores themselves are still pores. Air can still move through them. Water vapor, the gaseous form of water that's involved in the evaporation and breathing process we described earlier, can still pass through an oil-treated pore far more easily than it can pass through a solid plastic film. Beeswax does something complementary. On its own, beeswax is highly hydrophobic. Water beads and rolls off a waxed surface dramatically. It's also naturally resistant to mold and fungal growth, which is part of why beeswax has been used for centuries to preserve materials that are vulnerable to rot. But beeswax is also flexible. Unlike a rigid acrylic film, a wax-based treatment can move with the natural expansion and contraction of the wall material as temperatures change without cracking. When oil and beeswax are combined, you get a treatment that does several things simultaneously, and does them in a way that synthetic products, despite decades of chemical engineering, have never quite managed to replicate without the trade-offs we described. The basic principle is straightforward enough that it sounds almost too simple, and that simplicity is exactly why it's been so easy for an entire industry to position alternatives as more advanced. You start with an oil. Historically, this might have been linseed oil, walnut oil, hemp seed oil, or other plant-based oils depending on what was regionally available and affordable. These are what are sometimes called drying oils, meaning that when exposed to air, they don't just evaporate the way water does. They undergo a chemical process called oxidative polymerization. Essentially, the oil molecules react with oxygen in the air and link together, gradually transforming from a liquid into a solid, flexible material within the pores of whatever they've been applied to. This is the same basic chemistry behind traditional oil-based wood finishes and oil paints, which is why a well-oiled wooden tool handle or an old oil-painted surface can last for generations. Beeswax is then combined with this oil, typically heated together so the wax melts and disperses evenly through the oil, creating a single liquid mixture that can be brushed, rubbed, or otherwise applied to a wall surface. The material is worked into the surface, allowing it to soak into the pores of the wall material. Depending on how porous the surface is and how much treatment it absorbs, multiple coats might be applied, with time between coats to allow absorption and the beginning of the oil's curing process. There's no specialized ventilation requirements of the kind associated with many synthetic products, no hazardous fumes requiring respirators, and no waiting periods measured in days before the treated surface can be safely occupied. The materials themselves are, in most cases, food safe or close to it, which says something about the relative toxicity profile compared to industrial sealants. Maintenance, when it's needed at all, typically involves simply reapplying the mixture to areas that show signs of wear, which tend to be gradual rather than the sudden, dramatic failure, peeling, cracking, bubbling, that's characteristic of synthetic coatings reaching the end of their lifespan. What's interesting about this particular piece of traditional knowledge is how clearly it illustrates a pattern that shows up again and again when you start looking at the history of building materials and techniques. Time and time again, traditional approaches that were developed over long periods through direct, practical experience, approaches that worked with the natural properties of materials rather than trying to override them, have been pushed aside in favor of industrial products that promise convenience and modernity, but that often introduce new problems while solving or appearing to solve the original one.
Oil and beeswax as a wall treatment is a particularly clean example because the underlying chemistry is so straightforward and because the failure mode of the modern alternative, trapped moisture leading to mold, rot, and structural damage, is so directly the opposite of what a breathable, penetrating treatment provides. If you're dealing with a wall that's struggling with moisture, whether it's a basement, an exterior wall, a garden structure, or anything built from porous materials like brick, stone, plaster, or earthen construction, this is a technique worth understanding, not because it's mysterious or forbidden in any literal sense, but because it represents a genuinely different approach to a problem that the products on the shelf in front of you were never really designed to solve, only to manage repeatedly as long as you keep buying them. The materials are inexpensive, the application doesn't require specialized skills, and the underlying principle, work with the material's natural properties instead of trying to seal it away from the world, is one that's been quietly proving itself for a very long time in walls that in some cases are still standing centuries later.